So that was a pretty eventful day 7 or 8, I think, of Bears camp. I'm losing track because the timeline is just filled with Bears talk endlessly, which makes for a beautiful time of year. You have summer winding down, which is bad, but then you have the Bears at camp and everybody and their mother seemingly reporting, which means that it's good because summer's winding down. But what's going on, guys? Welcome into the Fireside Bears YouTube channel. Usayd Kolsho and Max Smith here. You can follow us on Twitter at Usayd Kolsho and at Max Smith ESM. Make sure you're following Fireside Bears on Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram at Fireside Bears. Also, check out our weekly podcast. I dropped a bonus episode this week. Sitting down with Pro Football Focus's Ari Mirov, aka My Sports Update, as a lot of you guys know him on Twitter, where we talked about the NFC North, and that's available on pretty much any podcasting platform. But Max, I was at Bears camp today, but first I got to ask, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing good. Wishing I was over there. Wishing I was at camp. Wishing I was seeing some of these talented players live. But it is what it is. Hopefully, we still get the chance to be in person at football games this year. Who knows with this Delta variant? But glad you were able to watch some live football for the first time in a while.
Yeah, it was nice because this was actually the first padded practice that I'd been to in about 2 years. So, and if you saw some of the pictures I took, I mean, I was right there up front. I was just like, no, because I had my other co-host from my other podcast, Andrew Freeman, with me. My publisher, Zach Pederson, was there as well. A couple other people that I knew from Bears Twitter, and I was just like, no, guys, if we're gonna get the best view, we're standing right here. And it was nice getting a front row seat to all the red zone and goal line drills and stuff. Justin Fields and Khalil Mack are head and shoulders just winning the visor game. Nick Foles, I don't understand, and I just tweeted this, by the way. I do not understand why Nick Foles said on Tuesday that he's the best version of himself that he's been in years. I swear, dude, I counted like 2 or 3 interceptions today, and one of the interceptions was the dumbest stuff on the planet. Like, Alec Ogletree, who's been here for 2 or 3 days, has picked you off multiple times already. And Ogletree was like literally right there in front of you, like on the line of scrimmage, and so covering a running back in some way, somehow he managed to like intercept you. I do not know what it is with Nick Foles.
Yeah, a lot of iffy tapes coming out of Nick Foles in training camp, and if you're Ryan Pace, you hate that because you were hoping that after training camp injuries with other teams can look at tapes of Nick Foles throwing the ball around in pads and shorts and go, okay, maybe we can give old Nick a try. But I'm fairly certain there's a lot of teams out there now who wouldn't touch him with a 9.5 foot long pole because, like you mentioned, Alec Ogletree, which was kind of an 11th hour out of nowhere signing. I wasn't expecting it. I didn't think we needed a player like Alec Ogletree at that position. It's good depth, solid depth. He's a solid player. This is correct. I think he had 3 interceptions today. Correct me if I'm wrong. That's 4 in 2 days that he's been with the Bears. Man just really wants to slam dunk the ball in that turnover bucket. But great stuff for him. Bad stuff for Nick Foles. So you're completely right. That bizarro press conference where he pretended to be like Aaron Rodgers and try to like command this team. He's not putting his money where his mouth is, but he did see. Go ahead and tell us, because I saw some pictures, but I don't know, since you were there. He seemed to spend a lot of time with Doug Pederson, who was kind of a random guest appearance at camp today. Do you know anything about that? Are there any rumors about Doug joining the coaching staff? What's going on there?
Yeah, so real quick here, I mean, what happens is I roll up to camp and, they were on different fields today. So they rerouted like the route that they wanted fans and just media to take to get to the back side of the field. Because if you've been to Halas Hall, it's like 2 fields on the left side, 2 fields on the back side, and then there's the Walter Payton Center. So it's like 500-yard fields. Going to the back today was interesting because there's a point where the coaches and players they walk and then security cuts it off, so no fans are getting in the way of the players, because that would be an incredibly dumb thing to do. And so I see Matt Nagy walking with, lo and behold, Doug Pederson, and I'm like, wait, something is brewing here, because why is Doug Pederson here just like 2 to 3 days after Nick Foles had the bizarro press conference? And more importantly, why the hell is he here dressed in Bears gear? Because he wasn't wearing the exact same stuff as Nagy. Which, side note, Nagy ditched the visor for camp today. if you're Nagy and you're watching this, or you're Nagy's kids, you know what? Please go ahead and tell your daddy to put the visor on, because no one wants to see that bald head. I'm sorry. Okay. I'm sorry. But anyways, getting back to the relevant stuff here. So I see Pederson out there on the practice field, and I'm like, okay, so he's talking to Andy Dalton, Nick Foles, who obviously was his head coach the year he won the Super Bowl with the Eagles about 5 years ago at this point. And I'm like, all right, just whatever. Then, I see him getting more and more involved. And then news breaks on Twitter that Doug Peterson's here, a couple pictures. I texted someone in the national media. I'm like, hey, Doug Peterson's here at Bears camp. As soon as that news broke from the one national media source, what ends up happening is a PR person comes over and they take Doug to the far side of the field where no fans can take pictures. So I keep working the phones and I just find out, yeah, he's just here as a camp guest, just like visiting for a day. The team hasn't like hired him or anything. Although I did hear one person tell me that there is a possibility that they've hired him as a consultant, which, by the way, I could totally see that happening, because how many head coaches have we seen fired over the last couple of years that don't land gigs? And then instead of taking a year off, they go ahead and they just land a gig as like a consultant somewhere. And considering Nagy had Brad Childress the last couple of years on the coaching staff, and Brad did have veteran experience running this exact offense when he was in Kansas City with Nagy as well as Andy Reid. I could totally see the Bears hiring Doug Pederson as a consultant to Matt Nagy, but unfortunately that didn't happen today. Or I should say fortunately, because we don't need another fired head coach on our coaching staff telling our already polarizing figure of a head coach what to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was a little stunned when I saw this morning. It was really early this morning, but that's the first thing I noticed in the picture was he's wearing blue and orange. It's a little suspect to show up to a team's camp. I mean, I guess it makes sense when coaches show up to pro days. Typically, they don't wear their team colors. They'll wear more neutral tones because they're trying to blend in. Maybe that was a deliberate part by the Bears, because hey, it's really hard to tell if it's Doug Pederson unless you're close, I guess, because you would be wearing those Bears colors. Maybe that was a PR move to kind of hide him in the background, but that wouldn't be necessarily out of the realm of possibility. Like you mentioned, Pederson and Nagy have a relationship. They have a previous working relationship. Nick Foles, Doug Pederson have a relationship, a deep relationship. And the Bears also have history of hiring, like you just said, former coaches who are now in assistant consultant positions. Like you mentioned, Brad Childress, but also Mike Pettine, who was Green Bay Packers defensive coordinator last year, is now serving in an assistant consultant position for Sean Desai's defenses coordinator. So this might be this kind of brain trust that Matt Nagy is putting together to assist the production and development of Justin Fields and other offensive talent on the team. Now, Doug Pederson isn't known for his great quarterback decisions in the league. However, it is important to note that, he did win a Super Bowl. He did work with Carson Wentz, and he did work with Nick Foles. And yes, he had an interesting year last year. But there's a lot of fans in Philadelphia who think that he was unjustly fired in the past season and would like to see him back on his feet. Now, I would say it's very odd for us to be giving him a bunch of money when I'm sure he's comfortable being paid, because he got basically the rest of his contract was bought out by the Philadelphia Eagles. He's still being paid by the Eagles at the moment. It would be very weird, I guess, unless he's really passionate and he really wants to have a job. He could be sitting at home being paid by the Eagles. He could be doing this on his own dime if he wanted to, or rather on the Eagles' dime. He may not even be paid. There's like so many things that could be going on right now. He could just be doing Matt Nagy a favor, showing up to camp, giving him a couple notes. He had a clipboard with him. We saw him walking with Nick Foles. He might have spent some time with the quarterbacks. Who knows? There's so many questions, and I'm sure we'll learn more throughout the week. But that's one. There's so many different things that happened today, right? So I guess that's a good thing for us. So there's that aspect. Doug Pederson will keep you guys updated. Make sure if you see anything, keep us updated. But outside of that, what other storylines do we have to talk about? The injury bug has been spreading like wildfire. There's two things spreading in Chicago: COVID-19 and the injury bug at Halas Hall. What are we dealing with in that front?
Yeah, so real quick side note, it's weird because every time I'm at Bears camp, Albert Breer seemingly shows up, Governor Pritzker shows up, and then Doug Pederson now shows up. And this has just happened over the years. So I don't know what it is with me actually making my way to Bears camp. It's just like some big name figure always tends to show up. But yeah, injury bug's interesting because it's just like, listen, we thought it was bad with people like Elijah Wilkinson and Eddie Goldman going on the and Patrick Scales or Scales, the long snapper. I just call him the redheaded guy. That's not Andy Dalton. It's Patrick Scales was the original Red Rifle before Andy Dalton got to Chicago. Okay.
Very true.
So you get those guys going on COVID-19, and then you get the report that it's probably a false positive, opens up some hope. I mean, didn't see any of those three guys out there, which means it's not a false positive. And then you're dealing with, the Tevin Jenkins saga, which at this point I've accepted it for what it is. It's something more serious than like back soreness or back tightness. And Matt Nagy's going to continue lying to your faces. So there's no point in getting mad anymore. Desmond Trufant going down with an injury. Latavius Simmons and Larry Borum, who Larry Borum got first team reps with the offensive line yesterday, or I think it was Tuesday. It might have even been Thursday. I don't even know. My days are mixed up. But all you need to do is you got first team reps at left tackle. So he's out with a concussion. Latavius Simmons left practice early today with a concussion. Eddie Jackson's out. Jermaine Ifedi remains out. James Daniels has a quad injury. Then you've got Tariq Cohen, who I saw at practice today, by the way, still has a brace around his knee about 11 months after he tore his ACL. So right now the Bears are hit with injuries. And you could make a case for them being one of the most injured teams going into training camp, which again, I find or currently at this point in training camp. And I find that to be so odd because you move training camp from Bourbonnais back to Halas Hall. And then your general manager admitted that, well, this is one of the most taxing times of the year on their bodies. But your motive for moving camp from Bourbonnais all the way back to Halas Hall was the fact that you invested so much into this entire facility and it was going to help players recover and get better. And it seems like every single day, someone new is going down with an injury.
Yeah, I've seen too much smoke on Twitter and people who genuinely believe that Tevin Jenkins is fine or Nagy's right. We've been skeptics on this show ever since the injury news came about, and seeing him, this is what, day 8, where he's just in shirts and shorts. There's obviously something going on with Tevin Jenkins that we just don't know about. And look, you're completely right. If the Bears hope to continue to be a competitive franchise in the future, not just with the current talent that they have, but acquiring new further talent, they need to ensure player safety is top priority. And I'm sure that's absolutely the truth. But there is something to be said when we notice, wow, there's a lot of injuries going around. And again, this is always my gripe, is the lack of transparency about said injuries. It's just not a great feeling for the fans to not really know what's going on. It's not a great feeling, I'm sure, for some of the players in the locker room to not really understand what's going on either, unless they're personally close with the situation at hand. So there's just a lot to question here. But what I'm particularly worried about, and I'm not super worried, I'm not writing doomsday, I'm not like, oh, our season's over, throw it all into the can. It's not a good thing to have 7 of our top offensive linemen out. We're like scraping the bottom of the barrel. Shout out to Alex Bars. He's still out there. He's taking snaps. Great guy. Especially when we were trying to put in our future franchise rookie quarterback. Let's look at what's happening to Joe Burrow right now over in Cincinnati. He does not look the same, according to every reporter, every beat reporter, every national media reporter who's been to Cincinnati camp says he does not look the same. His swagger isn't there. The balls aren't there. Something is up with Joe Burrow. Of course, something's going to be up with Joe Burrow after a terrible injury like that because he had a shoddy line. So now we look at Justin Fields. We go, should we put Justin Fields in a situation to get hurt? The obvious answer is no. But of course, we don't want to put Andy Dalton in a situation to get hurt either. So the biggest concern, of course, for all fans, and I'm sure that this is just across the board for entering the season, is now our offensive line. If we didn't have issues with it before, because we did on this show, we had questions about depth at the offensive line, as every fan should. But again, Matt Nagy says we have an incredibly deep roster. We don't. I'm willing to argue that day and night, we do not have a deep roster. We have a talented roster, but it's not deep. That is a big concern for me for the team. I'm positive moving forward. Like we've said before, there are solid options at tackle on the free agent market. You still have Russell Okung. You have Mitchell Schwartz, who, yes, he's coming off of an injury, and yes, he may still be rehabbing that injury, but it's definitely something to be looking out for. So I wouldn't be surprised if the next couple of days you see some roster moves and you see some names being brought in for tryouts, or you see some names being signed, because this is the number one issue for our offense moving forward. Is like we've said, and like everybody who knows anything about football, the games are won in the trenches, and especially with an offense that's built on speed, elusiveness, mobility, you need to have a good offensive line. Now, the good news is there's not a lot of key positional players who are hurt right at the moment outside of the defense. But we've seen resurgence in Roquan Smith. He's having a fantastic camp, according to reports. With Justin Fields is having a fantastic time. And I'd like to pivot to Justin Fields after a little injury discussion, because there was one thing that stuck out to me. And I believe it was, I think it was a reporter from The Athletic who said that every single snap he noticed Justin Fields was getting better. And that from day one to today, Justin Fields looks like a different quarterback. And some of the throws that he's making, the more confident he's getting, the longer he's staying out there. After, I think it was after practice today or yesterday, he was out on the hills outside of Halas Hall, running up and down them while everyone else was in the locker room. He wants to be great. And like Jimmy Graham said, he reminds him a lot of Russell Wilson because he wants to be great. What did you see today from Justin Fields that got you really excited?
So there were two things, and shout out to the guy at the front of the doors, Bears camp, giving me a cool wristband. Side note: if you're going to camp, they're only going to hand out like one wristband per person, so just get it while you can because they're limited edition, by the way. But anyways, there's two things I noticed about Fields. Number one, during goal line drills, I want to say I was probably about like 30 to 40 feet away from Justin, so it was look, it was overall just eventful to see because you saw the poise, the leadership, the command that we've seen come out of Justin Fields as an experienced quarterback during his time at Ohio State. That was fully present. You also saw the effort, the relentlessness, the arm strength, the accuracy. It was all present. There were actually two plays that I found to be really interesting. Number one, he rolls out of the pocket all the way to the right. He sees the pockets collapsing, boom, rolls out. What does Justin do on the run? Threads one to Jesse James for what was a touchdown. That was beautiful. And why? Because on that one play, you saw mobility, you saw the instincts, you saw his ability to feel pressure and say, hey, pocket is collapsing. Let me get out and make something out of nothing to keep the play alive. Let's be honest. We haven't seen that over the last couple of years out of a Bears quarterback. Okay. And then number two, there was a pitch that he had. Roquan Smith picked it off. And then what had happened is I tweeted this out, but Justin just boom went after Roquan Smith and actually caught up to him, showcasing why he was putting that 4.40 yard dash time to good use. And so, really, when we talk about Justin's progression as a quarterback, we get so caught up in the football side of things. And what I mean by that is his ability to go through the progressions and go 1 2 3, his ability to go ahead and be a phenomenal athlete and make the most of his football skill set, but all the mental side of what I should say is this: the mental side of Justin Fields' game was so apparent to me at this practice on August 6th, and you can slowly tell, hey, he's getting to a point where I want to say by the fourth week of camp, which again is coming up in a couple of weeks here, I think he's going to be ready to make a serious push for QB1. But overall, a really solid day from Justin. Now, to get into Andy Dalton, I want to say Andy Dalton's anticipatory throws have been on the mark too. There are a couple plays where he absolutely put it on the money for Darnell Mooney. Darnell Mooney had a leaping grab over Jalen Johnson. And so ultimately, when we look at it, I want to say this is that both of these quarterbacks are playing at a high level. And whether you are team start Justin Fields day one, week one, or you are team, hey, let Justin sit so we don't throw him to the Wolves team, whatever team you're on, you know what? You are legitimately in good hands. And when it comes down to naming that starting quarterback, which is going to be Andy Dalton, by the way, Okay, there's not necessarily like a right or a wrong answer. Now, I will say this: when the first official depth chart of the 2021 season does come out over the next couple days here with the Dolphins coming into town, just expect Andy to be penciled in as QB1 and Justin as QB2.
Yeah, yeah, it's most definitely going to happen, and I think a lot of fans have been pleasantly surprised seeing some of the clips of Andy in camp. Because I know I have. He looks top of his game. He looks much better. And again, it's really easy to say this because it's training camp and it's not full contact. It's not game time scenarios. But he's making some really great throws, and there's been a lot of reporting about his relationship on field with Allen Robinson, that he's already building a bit of rapport with Allen Robinson and Darnell Mooney. Have you been seeing that, or did you see that at all at camp today?
Yeah, with Justin, I did see it from time to time, but we also have to keep in mind is that relationship's not as extensive as we think or we know it's going to grow into. One, because it takes time, but number two, Justin is running with the second team offense, which by
Yeah.
the way, the Bears are at a point where they are mixing it up. It was the twos today with Justin Fields as a quarterback against the ones on defense today. So the Bears are mixing it up. But I will say this: one of my notable takeaways, and I have my notebook open here, was that Justin hit a couple passes to some of the running backs, which includes David
Mhm.
Montgomery, CJ Marble, Damian Williams. So my point is that the chemistry and trust between Justin and these playmakers is continuing to grow. And the fact that we're not even at we haven't even wrapped up the second week of camp, but we're seeing such strong progression from Justin just bodes well for the future. Which, by the way, Louis Riddick was on ESPN yesterday talking up Justin Fields. I'm here to tell you right now two things. Number one, Louis is incredibly close to Matt Nagy, and Louis knew when the Bears were on the clock back in April that it was going to be a quarterback and it was going to be Matt's hands all over it. But the point is that Justin's much farther ahead than where a lot of people expected he was going to be at this point.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think anyone who's watching any of the clips, even if you're, a football analyst or not, or a football commentator or not, you can tell that he looks like he's not the third, fourth, fifth quarterback taken off the board. And I will say this again, just as somebody, as a fellow fan who looks at national media, Justin Fields has been consistently one of the most talked about quarterbacks in the national media. I haven't seen a lot about Zach Wilson. I've seen barely anything about Trevor Lawrence. And when we talked to Ashley Sullivan, we talked about that's because of Jacksonville's small market or mediability, but our marketability. But later down, I'm sure Trevor Lawrence will bring a lot of cameras and a lot of focus to Jacksonville. But the only other quarterback I've been seeing a lot of has been Mr. Trey Lance in San Francisco. Both Justin Fields and Trey Lance have been turning heads at training camp. And you have a lot of reporters, you have a lot of national media personalities who are going, wow, these two look great right now. And that's why I'm saying down the next couple of years, I'm going to say this, and you can go ahead and expose me if it's a cold take. I think Trevor is on his own pedestal. You can't really compare the two. Trevor Lawrence is such a unique talent in this draft class, but it's going to be Trey Lance and it's going to be Justin Fields. Those are going to be the two because their games are very similar. They both have those great, accurate, big arms. They're both incredibly mobile, and they're both incredibly smart. They're both ridiculously smart guys who are just fantastic at reading the field. Anyone who's like, oh, Justin Fields doesn't know how to do progressions, doesn't know what he's talking about. Trey Lance and Justin Fields both know how to do it incredibly well. So just watching tape from San Francisco 49ers camp, they look very similar right now. And that, that's pretty exciting because Trey Lance went pretty early, right? So that's pretty exciting that of Justin Fields is second overall, caliber, which we know he is. We're very thankful he fell down to us. That should make you hyped. And I want to talk about Jesse James super quickly because again, out of nowhere, a late season Bears edition has been turning heads in camp again. Jesse James is a solid Swiss Army knife of a tight end. His time at Pittsburgh was pretty productive. The Detroit Lions paid him a lot of money to sit on the bench and not really do much, so his overall numbers kind of declined. But we were talking about that kind of option. If Jimmy Graham went down and Cole Kmet was expected to pick up the carry-all, who would be that receiving backup tight end who's going to be able to come in and kind of fill in the Swiss Army knife role? And Jesse James fills that perfectly. what a good addition to this roster. Justin Fields has been loving whipping the ball to him. Like everyone, and I'm sure you can comment on that, it has been saying that one of his favorite targets this entire training camp in the past couple of days, rather, has been Jesse James. And I mean, what a cool name to bring to Chicago. And I know there's a lot of Steelers fans who are kicking the dirt because they wish that they brought him back after a little disgraceful falling out. But there's a lot to be excited about. Are there anything else? Oh, you mentioned Khalil Herbert because you tweeted about him a lot today. You know, I'm a big Juice guy. You know, I think he's fantastic. You know, I hyped him up a lot back in May. But what did you see from him at camp today?
Yeah, I saw Khalil Herbert's vision on display. There's actually one play where it appeared he was going to be tackled. He caught the pass from Justin Fields, breaks the tackle, and finds his way into the end zone. So that's where the toughness, the determination, the grit was on display for Khalil Herbert. And by the way, I talked to people who covered him at Virginia Tech right after the Bears had drafted him. They kind of all said the same thing, that Khalil was a player that was a very hard runner. I think that when you look at his receiving production, let's be honest, he wasn't the best receiver. But what he did showcase was, I think that he's improved in that aspect of his game since he's arrived in Chicago. Also, he is getting reps as a returner on special teams. Side note, I have no idea why Darnell Mooney is back there returning kicks. He should not be doing that at all. The Bears absolutely, if they want to avoid another Tariq Cohen torn ACL situation, then they need to get Darnell Mooney off the field during special teams. But yeah, Khalil's been looking really good. And when you look at this in the greater context, speaking of Khalil Herbert, when you look at the running back room in general, I mean, Damian Williams he beat Roquan Smith today for a reception, which was awesome. And Damian Williams, despite the fact that he is going into his seventh or eighth season, and you would think that there is a lot of tread on the tires for a running back, and he did miss 2020. He's looking really good, and that bodes well for Chicago going forward because it is going to make David Montgomery expendable. It is going to make the rest of this offense expendable in terms of the matchups that you're going to use, even when we talk about personnel wise. So ultimately, what's kind of happening here with the Bears is one of my main takeaways after going to my second practice is that this team's ready to surprise some people in 2021. And I know that we're at a point in the offseason where I completely trashed this team on our weekly podcast. And I was just like, how could you sign Andy Dalton? I'm going to clarify something real quick. My reaction was more so because we were in on Russell Wilson, and then to go from possibly getting Russell Wilson to downgrading to Andy Dalton within a matter of 24 hours is a major downgrade. Okay. It's like going from Aaron Rodgers to Jordan Love, which is going to happen a year away. I've already started the countdown. But then the second thing that I wanted people to understand is that the Bears really lucked into Justin Fields, which makes the offseason a bit better. And then you luck into Tevin Jenkins, which makes it a bit better. So missing out on Russell Wilson, but then getting Fields and Jenkins is great. But yeah, training camp overall, I mean, Khalil Herbert, I think when we talk about players that are going to have rookies on this Bears team that are going to have an instant impact, I would say Khalil Herbert's probably going to be one of the ones. And again, I'm not going to label Justin as an instant impact rookie just yet, simply because as it stands right now, if the season were to start today, you could make the argument that Andy's going to start all 17 games.
Yeah, and I don't think it would be entirely remiss to make that statement, especially if the season started today with our offensive line looking like this. I don't think I would want Justin Fields to start any of the 17 games. But yeah, no, absolutely. That's incredibly well said. There wasn't a single Bears fan alive that looked at the notification saying, oh my gosh, Andy Dalton's a Chicago Bear. What happened to Russell Wilson? Things happen, cards fell as they did, and this is the hand that we were dealt. But I've been pleasantly surprised with some of the clips I've seen of Andy Dalton. I've been pleasantly surprised with what some of the players on the offense are saying about Andy Dalton. And, you know, Andy Dalton is not a terrible quarterback. It's really easy to look at what he did last year in a pretty bad situation and forget the fact that he led. Andy Dalton's Bengals were like the Derrick Rose's Chicago Bulls. Like they were always there in the playoffs. They were always like a pretty good team. They just never had enough to really push them deep. But he was always the one that would get them there. And, you know, he had a solid cast around him. Andy Dalton, in my opinion, is just as good as Joe Flacco. Joe Flacco had one of the greatest defenses of all time to help him get there. But anyways, Andy Dalton's not a bad quarterback, especially back with Bill Lazor, especially with some of the talent that's around him. We could be competitive this year. I think, like you said in the last episode, that the defense feels like there's a chip on their shoulder, that they need something to prove, and this is a prove-it year for many of them contract-wise. So I think they can ball out. I think there's a lot to be excited about, but of course, we'll just have to continue monitoring the injury situations. We'll have to continue monitoring any other storylines, potential future signings. We're still not done there. So there's a lot to keep out looking for, but I think that's about what we have to say today after today's training camp, and I'm sure we'll get back at it sometime next week.
Yeah, real quick though, I think one thing to add here, and let's just take 2 or 3 minutes to discuss this, but I thought cornerback Kendall Wilder, who was a 2025 round pick,
Sure.
and you did a breakdown on Kendall Wilder earlier when we first joined up with Fireside Bears, but Kendall had a really strong day. Now that I think bodes really well for him moving forward, because he's going to be in a position where Desmond Trufant's out nursing. I believe it's a hamstring injury, and with pads on both Saturday and Sunday going into the weekend here, Kendall's going to have an opportunity to really gain a significant foothold in that cornerback 2 job. And I mentioned this before when we did our cornerback positional preview. If you have Wilder and Johnson on each side locking down the wide receivers, that just, what it does, it's going to do wonders for your salary cap to have 2 young players, 2 young,
Yep.
really solid cornerbacks in a pass happy league on these cheap rookie contracts. But ultimately, that's just another thing, is Kendall looked really good. And when he spoke to the media on Thursday, you could tell that he was cool, calm, collected, and just super confident in his abilities going into year 2.
Yeah, he's an absolute professional. He's an incredibly underrated, incredibly undervalued player on this defense. The flashes of brilliance that he had the opportunity because of injuries at the secondary position last season allowed him to make the legitimate fight and a legitimate conversation piece that he deserves to be on the field almost every down, either at the 2 or at the nickel, right? And I'm not sure he's entirely there yet in the nickel, but he's got amazing instinct just to collapse on the ball. He loves the contact. He's not afraid of the contact. And when you have some of the best running backs in the league pat him on the helmet after a play because he made a fantastic open field tackle, he's something legit. And when he's this young, he's this good. Now, here's the thing: if you're watching this, here's the thing. Look at any of the stories from any of the reporters who are at Halas Hall or at Soldier Field, wherever they're going to have it. I'm not familiar with the schedule for training camp here, and look at his coverage ability. Is he doing better? Because that was his only weak spot last season, was his inability to keep up foot for foot with some of those more aggressive and some more of those speedy elite wide receivers. If he can do that, he's locked. He's solid. He has that cornerback 2 position, because you can't say that Desmond Trufant deserves it more than a young, hungry, really good, talented second-year player. So again, out of Georgia Southern, shout out Georgia Southern, go Eagles. But or Falcons, I'm sorry, I don't know what it is, but I know some guys at Georgia Southern, so shout out Georgia Southern and shout out Kendall Wilder. So absolutely good point. Make sure you look out for that. Make sure you watch his coverage ability, and he's definitely got to get snaps in the preseason. So if you really want to look out for him, just take a look there.
Yeah, also other observations include I saw a guy wearing a Rex Grossman jersey today at camp.
Nice.
It's probably the first time I want to say in like 10 years I've seen a Rex Grossman jersey. But anyways, that is going to do it from us, guys. Listen, make sure you're following myself and Max on Twitter at Usayd Colshon, at Max Smith ESM. Follow Fireside Bears on Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram at Fireside Bears. I promise, guys, as soon as the season kind of gets going here, all right, and I signed my job offer letter, I figure out what my schedule is, along with Max settling into his new apartment, and his job stuff calms down. We're going to be doing these YouTube shows, guys, multiple times a week, probably 2 or 3 times a week during the season. But hey, the Bears play a preseason game on August 14th with the Dolphins coming to town. We'll try to keep you guys as updated as we can. I know practices are closed off to the public, but I will try to get some beat reporters on that I know are going to be at Halas Hall to discuss those joint practices. But good morning, good evening, good night, ladies and gentlemen. Mask up, stay safe, bear down. Have a great rest of your day. We'll catch you guys next week. Bye-bye.